it's critical to understand, as the times change in the market, how is the profile of your ideal customer changing?
Welcome everyone, my name is Vishal Tekchandani, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by our Chief Marketing Officer, Jeff Tomlin, and we're going to talk about the numbers that matter in a recession. It's a really important topic. What are the metrics that matter to your agency as economic conditions change and become tougher? The famous management consultant Peter Drucker once said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So what are the things you need to be looking at as an agency owner in order to ensure you're driving sustainable growth? I'm really delighted to have Jeff with me. He's got a lot of experience in this area, more than 20 years, and he's got a lot to say about the metrics that you as an agency need to monitor right now. Jeff, welcome. How are you?
Great. How are you doing, Vish?
Good, thank you. So Jeff, lots of talk of a recession, tougher economic times. That has a flow-on impact to local businesses, which then has a flow-on impact to service providers like marketing agencies who provide marketing services. So for marketing agencies, what are the things we should be talking about right now?
Yeah, I think we're here. We've reached a recession, and I like to simplify the way that we think about how do we diagnose our business and ensure that we keep operating efficiently, effectively, and we continue to grow and weather the recessionary times. Probably the most important thing when you're keeping it simple is to understand the customer and how the customer's needs are changing. The customer is the most important part of all of our businesses, and it's critical to understand, as the times change in the market, how is the profile of your ideal customer changing. And I'll just give you an example of what we had to do when COVID hit. So that was an example of a big change that happened a couple of years ago in the market, and we sat back and we looked at the market conditions. We saw, number one, there was a huge need for remote work and remote work tools. They needed to be integrated in. There's a huge need for e-commerce tools. They needed to be integrated in the platform. And there's this huge demand for e-learning, and that's where the academy and community came out of. So it's just an example of how we had reacted to a big change in the economic environment. And so as an agency owner, one thing is, number one, you should have a really clear view of what your ideal customer profile looks like, obviously. And as times change, you have to evaluate that profile of the customer and see how are they changing, how are their needs changing, can you still serve them efficiently, do they still have the same urgency to buy, do they still have the same willingness to pay, and do they still have that same willingness to engage, and how is that changing?
Okay, can we dig into that a bit more? How does an agency owner and their team undergo that exercise to understand, hey, what verticals are working for us? What's not working for us? How do we shift our focus to? Yeah,
there's really practical metrics to measure those type of things, and it's sometimes it sounds like it's a lot of work in theory. It's not really. You can put it onto a grid, and you can imagine a box where you've got no fit, somewhat of a fit, or perfect fit, and along the vertical, you just put down those three those sort of 5 categories. You can come up with more, but I think the ones that I mentioned are probably the most important to understand about your ideal customer. What's their need? Their needs? Can you serve them efficiently? The urgency, the willingness to pay, and their willingness to engage with you. And so practical metrics to measure to see if those things are changing. The needs of the customer. Look at your inbound funnels. How are your funnel metrics changing? Customer churn will give you an idea of how big changes in their need. When you're looking at, can you serve them efficiently, you should have an understanding of what is your cost to serve a customer. How is that changing? So cost to serve is typically, your account executives, your support people, your, sort of the gross costs of maintaining your software and your gross margin. And those all together sort of give you a picture of what are your costs to serve a customer. So you can evaluate how those are changing. Urgency, look at your sales cycle. Is the time in your sales cycle changing? If your sales cycles are lengthening out, you know that the urgency of your customer has to be addressed. Willingness to pay, look at your average deal size, the bookings that your sales team has. How is that changing? Their willingness to engage with you and change, just take a look at your win-loss rates. That should give you an indication of how those things are changing, and then just put these things on a scale and see how they've changed over time, and will give you an idea of how your customer profile is changing. And you might need either to reposition yourself in the market, or you might need to actually change the type of customer that you're focusing on.
Okay, so thank you for pointing those metrics out, and I guess for different agencies, different markets, and different geographies, the nuances of what a good win-rate ratio, win-loss ratio could be different. But is there an ideal number that agencies should be targeting for these metrics? And importantly, how do you improve all those metrics? How do you become better at your win-loss ratio? How do you make customers more willing to spend with you?
Yeah. So what I would say is what the ideal metric is. It depends on the business. So if you're selling to mid-market businesses, you should be recovering your sales costs, your sales and marketing costs faster. If you're selling to sort of enterprise level businesses, you can recover your costs, further down the road, because the lifetime value of those customers is different. So what makes a good metric sort of depends on the type of customer that you're serving. What I would say is that there's a category of metrics that you could think of as risk metrics. And so as we're going into a recessionary time, risk is an extremely important thing to manage. And some companies might have a larger willingness to accept risk, given their ability to and access to capital. But you have to think about, can we do we have money in the bank, and can we continue to operate, right?
And let's dig into that. So for agencies, what are some of the ways to measure and manage risk?
Yeah, so I would say there's three that stick out. A lot of businesses right now, especially in the software space, but I think it's just as applicable for marketing agencies, is to manage to a rule of 40. A rule of 40 is this balance between profitability and growth. And the calculation, the idea around it is that your growth rate plus your profit margin should equal 40. So some companies, if you're growing a lot faster, you can accept a lower risk on your profit margin. Or if you're very profitable, that's a good sign. You don't necessarily need to grow quite as fast if you're running a profitable business. And so a lot of businesses right now are managing to the rule of 40. Before we started heading into this sort of recession, a lot of companies were valued on by their growth, and growth was valued more than say profitability. When the economic times change, all of a sudden the viability of your business and the stability of the business is more important, and that's why more and more companies now are managing to the rule of 40. So that's one. Another one is the cost of acquisition payback period. So this is just a measure of how many months does it take to pay back your sales and marketing costs. And so you look at the average basket size for a customer against your gross margin, and you measure that against your total sales and marketing costs, and you get a payback period, a period of time, a number of months that it takes to recover your costs. CAC payback is 100% a risk metric, and so again, if you asked before what's a good metric. Well, if you're selling to enterprise, you could pay back your sales and marketing costs in 18, 24 months maybe. But if you're selling to smaller businesses that typically have higher churn rates, you want to recover your costs in 6 to 12 months or less. And so it depends on who you sell to. But at the end of the day, you want to say what was sort of your typical benchmark on how long you're recovering your costs. In order to manage your risk, you want to see if you can move those down and recover your costs faster. Lots of ways to do that, like upfront commitments and so forth. And probably the last metric I'd say is you want to measure your sales efficiency. A lot of businesses try to, and for good reason, try to get annual commitments. So a lot of them are monthly commitments, but annual commitments are a great way to manage risk. Just by getting your customers to pay you up front, it helps you manage churn. But a metric called the CAC ratio measures sort of the efficiency or the cost to generate $1 of annual recurring revenue. And typically, an industry benchmark said it's really good. Anytime you can spend $1 to generate $1 of annually recurring revenue, you're in a good spot. But you want to be able to measure that over time and say, how is our sales and marketing efficiency changing now, and take the corrective course actions if it's suffering.
Thanks, Jeff. Lots of food for thought in terms of metrics. One more bonus question, if I may. This is, I would say, maybe the third or fourth recession that you've experienced in the workforce in a marketing capacity. 2000s tech crash.
You're dating me, hey? You want to date me in front of a camera? Eh?
Global financial crisis. Then we had COVID, and now we've got the binge from COVID and the excess credit in the economic system wearing off through higher rates and what have you right now. And I guess, going through all those downturns, my question is, what would your advice to an agency owner be in terms of how do you get through this? How do you get through this when times are tougher? Because a lot of our clients, they started their businesses only in the last 10 years when times were booming.
Yeah. A couple of things. Number one, one of the principles that we've always had around, and just as a leadership team around here, has always been frugality. And it's been frugality because, we've as a team, we've been through all sorts of different cycles and seen a lot. And you never know when a change is going to happen. And so you always want to be wise with your money. And that's just, that's just a good rule all of the time. Another thing is that when times change, it creates a lot of hardship for a lot of businesses, but it also creates a lot of opportunities. And I find that a lot of time when times change like this, people focus on managing the problems, and instead of looking for the opportunities. And oftentimes a lot of opportunities to grow come out of difficult times.
That's fantastic. Jeff, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that interview, and I hope you got a lot of food for thought. The metrics that you need to watch for, how to mitigate risks, and some great business advice from a man who's been through many a downturns. My name is Vishal Tekshanani, and I'll see you next time.